my wife was obviously concerned. So I said, let's have lunch with Juan. And as we were walking out of that place, and she said, he's just a normal person. He's got, his foils, his mistakes, but he's a straight out normal person. I said, yeah, he's not a psychopath. I'm the chair of one major committee at the university, and that's it. And all my peers are on like 6 committees. So they asked me, how do you do that? I said, run as an opposition candidate. I said, you're less likely to be made chairman of XYZ committee.
There are pockets of Singaporeans who still have become even more vocally anti-vaccine.
I get all these things from elderly relatives, and
it happens to you also.
Yes, it does. They always say to me, is this true? I say, no, it's exaggerated. But, there's often sometimes a kernel of truth in that.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Yala, your thrice weekly podcast where we talk about the hottest news with a touch of what, Terence?
Good old humor.
Good old humor, man.
Yes.
Well, today is another one of those special episodes.
Not another one. This is, again, like...
it is
special by itself. It's not another one of those special ones.
Yeah,
right?
correct. Yeah. It is a very special episode because we have someone in front of us who actually we've been watching for quite a while.
Yeah.
For multiple elections, really. And someone we've been wanting to have on a podcast for a long time.
Yeah.
So it is none other than Dr. Paul Tambyah, who is the chairman of the Singapore Democratic Party, practicing infectious diseases physician, and the immediate past president of the International Society for Infectious Diseases.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, that's
welcome.
a very impressive LinkedIn bio.
Yeah, welcome to Yala Butt, man. I mean, that's the thing. I think we speak about you in terms of like your expertise, right? I mean, this is international renown for your expertise in infectious diseases. So, I mean, there's a lot of things that we've heard about and talked about in the last few years, especially during COVID, right?
Sure.
A lot of things that you've said as well. But I think we are here also because of politics, right? The general elections are coming up. That's why we're here to talk to you. But but basically, what is keeping you busy like right now, these few days?
Well, there's a lot of things going on. It depends on which part of me you're talking about. From the infectious disease point of view, we're in year 4 of a 5-year large grant where we're trying to essentially detect the next COVID.
Oh, okay.
So we are working together with scientists from Duke NUS, from A-STAR, from NCID, and we're looking at people with pneumonia.
Yeah.
And, you wouldn't believe it, but to this day, wherever you are, Johns Hopkins, Harvard, Oxford, there's still about a third of people with pneumonia, you have no idea what caused it. So what we're doing is we're recruiting these patients. We're asking them to give us some blood, some phlegm, some sputum, and we're trying to develop some kind of way to diagnose what indeed is the cause.
So this is 1/3 of pneumonia patients.
Exactly. We have no idea what causes it.
Oh, okay.
And this research is being done in Singapore?
In Singapore. It's being done in Singapore, but we have actually expanded it to countries in the region. In fact, my collaborator at NCID, he's got a partnership with Vietnam. So we've got a couple of hospitals in Vietnam. And what we're doing is we're actually doing the work in Vietnam. So we're helping them to set up the lab over there. Because what these countries really hate is when people parachute in, they collect samples, they write their papers, and they forget about you. So we're not going to do that. We're going in there, we try and build capacity, we work in partnership with them.
I see,
and that's kind of what the International Society does, ISID. Because, most professional societies are based on Europe and North America and Japan and maybe Australasia. But the ISID has a strong focus on low and middle income countries. So our last conference was in Cape Town in South Africa. And it was a really great experience because we picked up an idea that I got from, we attended the meeting of the Kenyan Society of Infectious Disease.
Kenyan.
In Kenya. It was my first ever time in Kenya. And what they had was, a normal conference, you have people presenting papers, you got scientists, you got researchers. But they decided to have what they called a community village. And so they actually had patients. So they had people who had recovered from TB, from malaria, talking about how difficult it was to access care, what were the things that worked, what are the things that didn't work. And so we put that in our conference, and it was a real eye-opener. Because I know, they talk about the ivory tower, but it is true to a certain extent, because you're sitting in a laboratory or clinic in a high-tech developed country hospital, and you have no idea what's really going on in the streets in some very poor country. where they have very limited access to drugs and stuff like that.
I see.
So that's the medical side of you.
Yeah, that's the medical side of me. Then, of course, the political side. The election campaign is hotting up.
Yeah.
Just last Sunday, I was in Sembawang West. We did a food distribution because Dr. Chee has announced that he's going to be contesting in Sembawang West. And I was pleasantly surprised. There was quite a lot of people who showed up, and they were very supportive. We were there the week before when we made the announcement about the intention to contest Sembawang West. So we were at the 888 Plaza, which is a very unique place because across the road there's a traffic light. And I'm sure you've heard this. You cross one side of the traffic light, you're in Marsiling UT. You cross the other side, you're in Sembawang. And you cross the third side, you're in Sembawang West. So, there's no logic whatsoever to the division of the constituencies.
I think you've been, you were also quoted as like talking about Marsiling UT. And I think you mentioned that you're not sure if Prime Minister Lawrence Wong is going to be contesting there. And some people online have been picking up as, Dr. Paul Tambyah spreading rumors and things like that.
Well, I mean, you look at it this way. He started out at West Coast. And right now, West Coast is considered quite a hot area. Because Dr. Tan Cheng Bock has announced that he's going back there and he's in really good shape. He's walking around without any issues. So, in the last GE, we had Heng Swee Keat, who was moved to East Coast. So there's always a possibility. But of course, if he stays in Marsiling UT, that's fine. We're fully prepared to take him on.
But you said just now, this past weekend, you were pleasantly surprised to see people show up. Like, were you not expecting much?
Well, to be honest, we just publicized it a few days before the event. So I wasn't sure that many people would show up. Because I'll give you an example. The day before that, was it the day before, the day after that, they had a seniors event in Sembawang at Bukit Canberra. And, the publicity for that went out 2 months in advance. And so, a lot of that, my wife sent me a notice about that because that was done in collaboration with OCBC. So that was very well organized and well structured. But I think as Dr. Chee pointed out, in spite of the fact that it was planned at very short notice, we managed to turn out people and it managed to be pretty efficiently run.
I mean, that's it. I mean, I think your political career is something that we definitely want to delve into. But maybe because I think even in just researching and researching your background and everything, I was trying to find a lot of more information about your entry into politics, right? And I mean, we've heard some sort of stories here and there, but I would like just to find out, like, what pushed you in, was it 2011 to become, go so public with your political affiliations? Like, what exactly was the motivation for entering politics at that time?
Well, the main reason was, I came back from the States in 1999. I did 6 years of postgraduate training there. And a lot of people asked me, would you stay on in the US? I said, no way. The healthcare system is all completely messed up. They have some of the best medicine in the world. They have really high-tech stuff. A lot of the new discoveries come from the US. But at that time, and this was before Obamacare, there were 40 million people with no insurance. So it doesn't, it's like this point I was trying to make earlier. See, it doesn't matter if you have the best in the world. If people can't access it, there's no point. So I came back to Singapore and to my horror, I realized that we are slowly moving towards that route. In fact, we started out with a national health-based system in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. And the results were pretty good. In fact, the Singapore government produced a blue paper in 1981 reviewing the national healthcare system. And they pointed out, at that time, we had this $1 maternal and child health clinics, the OPDs that were all over the island. We didn't have these fancy polyclinics. And every day in the hospital cost only $5. And in spite of that, we had a life expectancy that was better than the US and comparable to the UK. In 1981, before the privatization took place. Then in 1985, they started privatizing the public hospitals and, corporatizing and all this kind of thing. And unfortunately, what's happened is, as I mentioned to many friends, what's happening in Singapore is that we seem determined to repeat all the mistakes of US healthcare of the last 20 years. I used to give feedback. It was quite funny that whenever MOH used to have a feedback session, the minister will present or the PERMSEC or whatever it is, And then everyone would keep quiet. And then they say, okay, let's have some questions. And then invariably it was myself and one or two other people who would ask the questions. Then it got to become almost a standing joke, because when they would have a session and then the chairman would go, okay, Paul, what do you say? So like I'm kind of obliged to ask a question.
And your questions were around?
Mainly about the financing, about the access. These are the main things that I felt were really important, because I mean, they're very smart people there, so they know how to bring in new technology. But you bring in new technology and you price it out of reach of people, that creates issues. You see, or they make a small amount available to the general public, then the waiting time becomes incredibly long, and it creates all kinds of problems. So finally, I realized, around that time, actually a few years before that, famously, Goh Chok Tong had told Catherine Lim, if you really want to make a difference, you have to go into politics. And so I decided I would, and I started volunteering for the SDP. And it was quite interesting, because it was in 2010, and I was giving a lecture at the Alumni Association, Medical Alumni Association, and Wong Wee Nam was there. And then he said to me, he said, you speak quite well. He says, why don't you speak at one of the rallies? Then I thought about it, and so I spoke at a rally in the 2011 GE. Yeah. And it's quite funny. The first one I spoke at, I think, was at Sembawang, and nobody noticed. Then the second one was at Boat Quay, and everybody noticed.
That was the one that went viral.
And I think it was because one of my students actually was there. And she videotaped the thing and she put it on Facebook, and then it got circulated.
Well, those were early days to be videotaping and putting stuff on the internet.
It was very early, 2011, that's 14 years ago.
But before going further, like, why do you decide to volunteer with SDP of all the opposition parties, or even the PAP, right, for that matter? Like, what was your decision process?
So, I mean, a lot of people have said, why don't you get involved with the PAP, and then you can try and change things from within. And I did seriously consider that. In fact, I was put up as a nominated MP candidate by the Singapore Medical Association. And nominated MP now we realize is actually a training ground for PAP MPs. But I failed the test. That was quite funny. Because
like a test,
I went for the interview, and there was a bunch of PAP MPs, and Lau Tia Kiang was in the interview panel.
This is a select committee.
A select committee, that's right. And it was quite funny. I didn't think anything of it. I called the SMA. I said, "Sorry, too bad. This year there's not going to be a doctor in the nominated MP group." And I didn't think too much of it until I was on a plane on the way to Bandung a few months after that. And actually, that was after the 2011 GE. And I was sitting next to Masagos and his wife, and making conversation. They say, "You look really familiar."
He was in the room.
He was on the plane, sitting next to me. Yeah. And then I didn't say anything. Maybe we met some event or other. And he goes, now I remember. He said, you were the guy who went for the NMP interview and you gave all the wrong answers. He said, it's like you didn't want to be the NMP. I said, oh, really?
What do you think it was? Why do you think, when you say wrong answers, what exactly do you think was the issue?
Well, there was one that came up to me. I can't remember who it was, who asked this question. She said, so GST. And this is 2009, I already had strong views on GST. So she said, what do you think about GST? Because people are not happy about it. And I said, well, GST should be 0 rated for essential items. I said, like foodstuffs. And I said, so many other countries do that. Then she said, oh, don't you think it would be imposed at administrative costs? I said, no, I don't think it does. Singapore is very small. It's very easy to contain. And you already have the $1 million threshold. If the turnover is less than $1 million, you're exempt from GST. So you could very simply do that. And then everybody gave me this dirty look. So I knew straight away, not going to make it.
But by then, before even deciding to enter politics, were you politically active? Because you were one of the founding members of this.
Marua, that's right. Yeah. I was, and I was more an activist. My wife always says that. She says, I'm more of an activist than a politician. But, it's in many countries, there's a very fine line between activists and politicians. And there's a relationship between the activists and politicians. And it's a matter of negotiating it. And both need each other.
Yeah. And I mean, so it's clear going with the PAP didn't work out.
Right.
Then why SDP amongst all the opposition parties?
Yeah, so SDP is the most clearly defined ideology. They're very much left of center, focused on human rights, focused on universal access to healthcare, to housing, to education. So Social Democratic Party, very similar to what's happening in Scandinavia, in Sweden, Denmark, and the Nordic countries.
Yeah.
So that was kind of aligned with my views.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
But in that case, like, when making the choice to join SDP, was it something of your own volition that you just started reading up and going, or were there conversations with, Mr. Chee Juan about joining and what role you play in it?
Yeah, no, it's entirely my own volition.
I see. Okay.
And, I was kind of in the background. And like I said, it was Wong Wee Nam who brought me up in 2011. And then, interestingly enough, there were a bunch of other doctors.
Yeah.
So we got together and we put together the healthcare plan that came out in 2012. And then after that, I got more involved. I still didn't join the party. I didn't join the party until the day before nomination day 2015.
Oh, I see.
And that's because of Maroa. You see, I enjoyed being in Maroa.
Yeah.
But the constitution of Maroa, like many, many civil society organizations, forbids political party members from being members of the civil society organization. So, and, Maroa was a lot of fun. I mean, the people involved with it, there was Siu Kam Hong, there was Niam Shitung, there was Brema Madi. Leon Pereira was also involved with Maroa. And it was interesting because we had to submit, every couple of years or so, Singapore submits a report to the United Nations Human Rights Commission.
Yeah.
And the government submits a report and the civil society sends a report. And the Singapore government is very clever, see. So they invite all the civil society groups to MFA, they give them tea, and they try and find out what they're going to say so that they can have an answer to it. But the civil society groups are also trying to find out what MFA is going to say so that they have an answer to it too. So it's a little dance that goes on. And I found those very, very interesting. And it was a pity to give it up.
I see. So I mean, you gave your first speech, you mentioned 2011,
That's right.
And you ran in
2015.
2015. So what about seeing the political landscape in Singapore at that time kept you going and kept you wanting to even run? Because I can imagine, as an opposition MP, it's not easy. As an opposition candidate, it's not easy. You're always facing obstacles, but you stayed for a few years. You ended up running in 2015, didn't win, but still carried on. What about the political climate or situation made you want to carry on?
Well, 2011 was a watershed election.
Yeah.
And I think everybody acknowledges that, even the PAP. George Yeo famously said the PAP must change. So that was a real signal that, that there was some hope, of effecting change. And those are substantial changes. There were changes in MRT, there was changes in the housing, and most important to me was changes in healthcare. You see, because people forget this. Before 2011, MediShield excluded all pre-existing illnesses, so it didn't cover people with diabetes, it didn't cover people with cancer, and it wasn't entirely our doing. But we came out with the plan in 2012, and also Obamacare came in. So MediShield Life covers pre-existing diabetes and pre-existing cancer and most of the pre-existing illnesses. So that's made a huge difference for thousands of people. So it showed that, if you get into politics, you make enough noise, you can, have an impact on vote share, which as the PAP was led by a mathematician and is full of very quantitative people. So they look at it and take it very seriously.
And I mean, you've been also still very vocal about how the healthcare system is still far from being perfect, right? I mean, you mentioned that after 2011 there were changes, but what did you see happen since then that makes you feel like it still needs a lot of fixing?
Well, there was 2015.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden the pace of change slowed down. And again, this is the quantitative nature of the PAP. So it's like, they're taking the temperature. The temperature sort of goes down, then there's no need to do that much change. So 2020 was a little bit of a correction. But there is still a long way to go. And like I said, I think the biggest problem is the fact that we're trying to replicate the mistakes of US healthcare. And I think, unfortunately, that's partly due to our system, is that we get all these consultants from McKinsey, from BCG, from Arthur Andersen, and they come in, and then we send our brightest people to Harvard Business School, Columbia, and Michigan.
Yeah.
And there's this mindset, see, about healthcare, which is healthcare is an industry, it must be sustainable. You have to take care of you have to have some kind of safety net, but it doesn't have to be too broad. In contrast, you look at what goes on in Europe or even in Japan and Korea and Taiwan, where healthcare is viewed as a basic human right. You see some of these things that are going on when they're talking about, the US and Denmark over Greenland. The people in Greenland, they know. See, they have free education, they have free healthcare. Why in the world would you want to become part of the United States? Which is just insane.
Yeah.
But so you speak about Scandinavian healthcare as like almost like a gold standard, right? What about politics there that makes the setting up of the healthcare system like that viable? And what is it that in Singapore, with our political structure or what, that doesn't allow us to reach that standard?
Well, it's interesting. I read a small book by Thomas Piketty. And Piketty is the guy who wrote the really big book on capital. And he says everybody talks about, Scandinavia, maybe it's the culture, they're very homogenous, or they come from, this kind of Lutheran background where you believe that everybody is equal. But he said, actually, this Scandinavian welfare state is relatively new. He said it only came about in the last 40 or 50 years. And it came about through a political change, through the election of the Social Democrats in the post-war period. And similarly, in the UK, although they backtracked tremendously with Thatcher, right? Because, Churchill won the war. It was amazing how he won the war. His back was to the wall. The Germans were bombing London, and he rallied the country, he won the war, and then he lost the election. Because the people realized that, you needed to look after the daily needs of people. So the National Health Service came about. Labour won the election. And now, even the most doctrinaire, conservative Tories are not going to dismantle the NHS. They're trying to water it down a little bit. They're trying to deal with some of the inefficiencies, and they're putting in all kinds of things here and there. But the NHS has sort of become part of the culture of the UK. You cannot destroy it. So I think this, according to Piketty's book, that's kind of what happened in Scandinavia.
But there's one thing about the politics. The one thing that, as a layperson looking at it, the one thing it's quite clear for the Nordic countries, Scandinavian countries, large parts of Europe, tax rates are higher. Right. I know you've also been vocal about increasing the tax on the rich.
Right.
But I think it was DPM, when Tharman was DPM, he also kind of pushed back on what you suggested, saying that everything you all are suggesting is like free healthcare, which I know you rebutted. But maybe can give us more light on how it's supposed to work, because our tax rates are not as high as the Scandinavian or Nordic countries.
No, they're not. Yeah. But again, that's talking about direct taxation. Yeah. There's a lot of indirect taxation that goes on here. There's the payroll taxes, which is in the form of the CPF. Then you've got the taxes on, for example, on property, private property, with all this ABSD and all this kind of thing. And then you've got the car taxes, which are astronomically high, which are the highest in the world. So if you add it all up, it is true that our tax burden is lower, but it's not necessarily that much lower. And that's the first point. Second point is that after Tharman criticized us, he went and raised the top income tax. So it's kind of funny, in a way, he recognized that that you couldn't keep the top level of income tax so low for too long. And of course, there's international things like this minimum tax that they're trying to put in, so they're trying to get people away from these tax haven sort of ideas. And Singapore did not want to be seen as a tax haven. But in spite of that, there are still lots of loopholes where people can get away with paying very, very little tax, but nowhere near as little as Elon Musk, though, who apparently pays next to nothing. But again, that's kind of the extreme version of that. So the other issue is that American healthcare is extremely expensive in terms of administrative costs. And that's what we're seeing over here. there was an article about a couple of weeks ago about a study that was done on insurance costs here in Singapore. And insurance costs have been going through the roof, I don't know whether either of you have health insurance, but I strongly encourage you to.
No, it's expensive.
But it's going up every year.
Yeah.
And the thing to do is to buy it when you're young, because then at least your starting point is lower. But it's going up every year, not because the doctor's fees are going up, but it's going up because the cost of implants, so those are these kind of devices if you need a knee replacement or something like that, and because of the hospital charges, and because of the administrative charges that are going up way above the growth rate of the premium itself. And what happens in the private sector also is tracked in the public sector. So there's so many administrative things that get thrown into the mix. And it's unfortunately symptomatic of the kind of bureaucratic state that we live in. So like, for example, the other thing that I feel very passionately about besides healthcare is education. So we have some really good and really dedicated teachers, but they spend so much time on administration, on doing projects and stuff like that, that it kind of sucks the life out of them in terms of, I have so many friends who are teachers, who say they just want to teach. They want to be with the kids. They want to see them grow. They want to nurture them. But they've got all these forms to fill, these projects to do, and it just, drains them.
Also, you're saying that the bureaucracy gets in the way of teachers as well as medical practitioners.
I think so, yes.
And the bureaucracy arises because just now in the healthcare, you mentioned that the cost of administration goes up. Is it because the private sector is causing it to go up high?
Well, it's both. So in the private sector, because, it's quite interesting. Someone pointed this out to me. In Singapore, non-lawyers are not allowed to own law firms. Non-accountants are not allowed to own accountancy firms. But so many clinics now belong to venture capitalists or to hedge funds. And their priority is to turn a profit for the shareholders. So what they're going to do is they're going to squeeze the bottom line. And they're going to just try and make sure you generate as much return as you can. So you spend a lot of time trying to, do all these business processes to try and speed things up. But the focus is very different from a system where it's viewed as a right, like defense and police. Nobody feels that you should pay for police you should private police. That's like Colombia or something like that, where everybody walks around with a bodyguard. But in most high-income developed countries, it's seen as a common good, right? Security, traffic police, defense. And in these countries, Scandinavian countries, these healthcare education is also seen as part of that. So I think that's where we're trying to move the needle. And the interesting thing is that we are not doing something new, because it's something that was there right at the beginning when the PAP first came into power in 1959. They were very much a democratic socialist party. And that was partly due to the left wing, to people like Lim Chin Siong and what's his name, Hock Seo and Po Su Kai. And people like that who are very, very socialist in their outlook. So they did this massive building campaign. They nationalized all the schools. They built primary schools everywhere so that everybody would get a chance. They built all these OPDs, which they'd already started building, even in the Labour Front government's time. So we're trying to say, let's go back to that, and I think it is possible. People always say you can't turn back the clock, but in a way you can. And, if you hear Trump, right, he says he's trying to turn back the clock to 1870 or to 1901, McKinley's time, right? So if the right can do that, there's no good reason why the left can't.
Very true. But I did want to ask, because like you mentioned, healthcare and education as big priorities for you. So a lot of your work and you've gained a lot of accolades from working as part of these institutions.
Right.
They were also, like you said, built under the PAP government and all that, right? So how does that affected your work, in terms of now that you're an opposition politician at the same time, but you're in these institutions that have long storied history as it links with the government and all that. How is it working within these organizations?
Yeah, well, first point is that actually most of these organizations predate the PAP. What the PAP did was they spread its reach. So even in the 1950s, people don't realize this, but the polio vaccines, the oral polio vaccines, were first studied in Singapore. A lot of the TB trials were done in Singapore in the 1940s, 1950s. So there was that level of sophistication. But what the PAP did was they made it accessible. And this is the whole point. See, the idea of access. And I think, what has happened is that as long as you stay within the OB marker, so to speak, see, the PAP recognizes that there's contributions that come from I guess, certain ends of the spectrum. I can't remember who it was who said there's the black list, the grey list, and the white list. So I think I'm still on the grey list.
The grey list.
Yeah. And in a way, I'm actually in a very good position because I get a chance to do what I like to do. I do research, I do teaching, I do clinical care, and I do very little administration. I'm the chair of one major committee at the university, and that's it. And all my peers are on like 6 committees. So they asked me, how do you do that? I said, run as an opposition candidate. I said, you're less likely to be made chairman of XYZ committee. They said, oh, that's quite a high price to pay.
Like 4D chess.
So I mean, like, would you say there is a price to pay from running opposition?
Well, I mean, I think it's not formally stated. And this is the thing about Singapore. See, they don't formally state this, but everybody tries to second guess what the bosses want. So they think, oh, if I put this guy as the chair of this committee, then there's 2 sides to it. See, one, will the big boss be unhappy? Will he report me? And will I lose my, position? And 2, they don't know whether they can really trust this guy. See? So it goes kind of on both sides of the coin, so to speak.
But was that a concern for you that there might be an impact in your career as an infectious disease?
Oh yeah, I can tell you this. Everybody was so concerned that I was going to lose my job.
Yeah, and
it's quite funny because soon after I spoke out in 2011, every time I went to Mount Elizabeth to visit someone, they say, "Oh, you're going to buy a unit. You've been kicked out of the university." I say, "No, I'm not going to waste my money on buying a unit in Mount
set
Elizabeth.
Set
up a clinic on my own." Because most of the people who were involved in a healthcare plan were in the private sector.
Sure.
They were GPs or they were specialists in private practice. So it's quite funny. There was once a couple of years after that when they asked me to go there's a regular meeting between the ministry and the hospitals, and I was asked to go. And it was the head of department. I said, look, I'm not the head of department. They said, oh, the head of department is not free, and the deputy head is not free, and the deputy head is also not free. I said, okay, look, just be straight with me. What do you want me to tell the Ministry of Health? And then they told me it was something to do with manpower allocation. So in a way, I'm in a very fortunate and kind of privileged position.
A very useful person to have on the team.
That's right.
Yeah.
Because he can be the bad guy.
Difficult,
just make me do it.
Good cop, bad cop. You're a bad cop.
Bad cop.
Well, but just also speaking of educational institutions, do you see, when you talk to younger people in these institutions, do you sense that sort of, whether it's fear of OB markers or consciousness of self-censorship of OB markers when you think about their careers and things like that?
Well, there's a certain amount of fearlessness in many of the young people, and I think that's because of social media. I'm sure you've heard about FASS has this criteria now for visiting speakers. I mean, the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences. After PJ Tham's wife got cancelled.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really ridiculous.
Yeah.
But and again, it's not something that came from the minister. I'm sure he didn't even know about it until it came out. But it's people trying to appear on the good books of the someone in the middle level, trying to appear on the good books and trying to avoid trouble and conflict.
Yeah.
So they put in this vetting process. And the students are educated, they're smart, they can go elsewhere for information.
But you mentioned that like healthcare, there's still a lot more to be improved, and that was the reason you entered politics.
Right.
But I mean, everything that I've been hearing from young is that Singapore healthcare is great. We should be grateful. Polyclinic everywhere. So it's kind of like at odd ends with what I'm hearing. So how did that come about?
Yeah, so on the surface, everything is good because everything is available. Yeah. And if you know how to negotiate the system, it can work really well for you. And that's why I wrote a foreword to Bertha's book. Because Bertha is a really smart
when Mama
individual.
fell, is it?
Yeah, when Mama fell. See, she's a really smart individual. And even she, with all her knowledge and understanding, and she essentially was dedicated to the care of her mom. She was there at the bedside all the time. But yet she found that she was being given wrong information, or she didn't know how to do something, or she had to negotiate. She filled in Form A when she should have filled in Form B. So this is what I mean when I talk about the bureaucracy. And we're not quite at the level of the US, but unfortunately we seem to be drifting to that level. So everything is there. See, and this is why it's doubly frustrating. See, if you're in Myanmar and you don't have resources to all the things that we have, then it's a different story. Because to go from Myanmar to the kind of resources that we need would require a huge infusion of funds, training, everything else. Whereas here we have the funds, we have the training. We just need to have people to negotiate the system. And it doesn't need to be that complicated. And you have to ask yourself, see, why is it that complicated? Ask me.
Why is it complicated?
So I think the reason why it's that complicated is because the fundamental way of thinking of the government, which is similar to what Reagan and Thatcher had, is that everybody is trying to game the system. So you want to catch the 2 or 3 people who are trying to game the system. And so you punish the 96, 97% of people who are not. Because you put in all these safeguards to catch people. Ronald Reagan used to tell this story about a welfare mother who was driving a Cadillac. It turned out it was completely untrue. There was no such person. See, but that image was seared into the mind of Americans, that people get welfare checks and then they drive a Cadillac. So similarly here, see, there's this idea that if you give people their CPF money, they'll go to Batam and spend all of it and come back and depend on the state. But I have yet to see one person do that, because most of the old men who go to Batam and spend all their money have no CPF to begin with. See, they were working at odd jobs and they're just dependent on their children,
But I mean, I know you've also been vocal about the CPF and how there's almost a lack of trust in citizens, right? But do you think citizens want that freedom? Maybe it's like we grew up in Singapore, we are like, everything's taken care of. I just do my thing. Maybe, like, how sure are you that people actually want that? Of course, online you hear a lot of chatter. Of course, there's the vocal minority. But how do you know whether people want that? Or do you think that is just the mark of an evolving democracy?
Oh, I think it's very real. And I'll tell you why. See, people my age, I'm just turned 60. So people my age who bought properties they shouldn't have. You'll find that their entire savings is tied up in the property. So you're stuck. See, you can sell the property, but then, that involves, then you're going to have to buy something. Because if you only have one property, okay, there's some people who have more than one property. That's a different category. But the vast majority of people only have one property. Then you put all your retirement savings into that one property. Then if you need money to live on, if you get retired or retrenched or whatever it is, then, where are you going to get the money? The government's current thinking is you're supposed to sell your flat. So if you sell your flat, you've got to find some place to live. So you got to end up paying some ridiculous sum of money for a smaller flat. So that is very real. So we have a lot of these people doing all this kind of things like CPF shielding. And when I talked about the closure of the special account for those over 55, that actually was one of my videos which had the highest interest in. And the PAP guys are very upset. They say, oh, look, it's only a small minority of people. But I think the principle is that, if you do your retirement planning, you're supposed to plan for 10 years down the road. You're not supposed to plan for 2 years down the road, right? So you plan for 10 years down the road. You have this money in your special account. You've done the shielding, and then you think you're going to get 4% interest, and all of a sudden they turn around and say, no, it's going to be 2.5% because you've hit the max on your retirement account. So you've got to redo the planning all over again, and this is where the trust comes in. When you keep changing the rules, then people find it very hard to trust the system. So there's ways around this. What you can do, you can change the rules in response to changing circumstances, but maybe you could grandfather in those people who already did their planning. You could say, okay, if you're 18 years old now, you're just joining CPF, then when you're 55, the special account will be closed. But because you're doing it to people who are 45, who are people who are 52, who have been planning based on the idea that they're going to keep their special account, then all of a sudden you pull the rug from under them, you see. So that affects the trust. And people say Singapore is a high trust society, but that's because those are the answers people give because they're afraid to give the wrong answer. So I think you have to look at what people are doing rather than what they say.
So there's one thing about people trusting the systems, but again, when we try to look back or listen to people who spoke about the Singapore and founding years, like it was very quick, changes happened very fast. And also looking at how I know during COVID you were quite vocal about how Singapore was lauded in many ways, but you were quite critical about certain things. And I remember the first time when I saw you give talk about your feedback, kind of not being taken into account. And then I looked up, you're like an infectious diseases expert who is kind of like feeling that his feedback is not being taken on board. Felt a bit weird. So do you think there's a tendency that right now the government is almost kind of too defensive for its own good about being open to change?
Well, to be fair to them, I mean, they did take quite a bit into account during COVID, but they were hearing voices from all over the place. See, so and again, it's in the DNA to be very conservative, and the one unique thing about COVID is Singapore issued an after-action report, and this is the first time I've seen a Singapore government report where they said these are the things we could have done better. I've never seen that, in 30 years of reading Singapore government's reports. We could have done better. It's not some guy who was handling the safety at the Spiros, shipyard, or some guy who was at Nickel Highway, who we're going to hang out to dry. But this was what we collectively as a Singapore government could have done better. So I was really encouraged when I saw that report, is that they recognized to see that there were certain things that went well, and there were certain things which didn't work. And the fact that you could recognize that gives me a little bit of hope for the next one.
I do remember, because we talked about the report on the podcast, there were like very nice graphics that they even used to communicate the flow of information. And they talked about, even the communication side of things could have been improved, which was very eye-opening for lay people like us to read. But even for you as an infectious diseases expert, that was very different. It's very unprecedented around in the world, is it?
Yeah, well, it's unprecedented for Singapore.
For Singapore, okay.
It's in the UK, they always come out with white papers after something bad happens.
Okay.
And usually, because they're bipartisan, so all the opposition guys will whack the government, and the government guys will be really defensive. But you see everything in the paper. See, but the point about communications is really, really true. I'm 3/4 of the way through a book by Francis Collins, who was the head of the NIH at the time. And I read Tony Fauci's book as well. And both men, they're very firm in their ideas, but they both acknowledged that there was a communications failure. See, that they were unable to communicate. And I think the most important thing as an educator in the field of the sciences is people took everything as black and white. And unfortunately, this is happening right now in the US with Robert F. Kennedy. It's like you're either pro all vaccines or you're anti all vaccines. You don't make a distinction between some vaccines which are life-saving, which prevent transmission of illness, which can eliminate diseases, and other vaccines which need to be improved. So there's no gray. Everything is black and white. And so again, like I said, the government's after-action report, I thought was a very positive thing.
But on that, there are, just thinking about COVID again, I mean, there are pockets of Singaporeans who still have become even more vocally anti-vaccine and everything since then. Why do you think what is happening in the US seems to be also spreading?
And again, it's social media. I get all these things from elderly relatives, and
it happens to you also.
Yes, it does. And these are people who pick it up from Fox News and from...
And they send it to infectious diseases
experts. No, they always say to me, is this true? I say, no, it's exaggerated. But, there's often sometimes a kernel of truth in that. And, they see the first word, no, okay, that's good. Okay. I say, don't keep sending it around to your friends. But I think that is what's happened. See, because of the tremendous explosion of social media, and even the seniors who are not on social media, they get this stuff on WhatsApp, and so they can open it, they can listen to it, and they can hear it, and they get quite convinced. I'll tell you, just this Saturday at the event that we had in Sembawang West, this lady came up to me and she said, I used to be a government supporter, but when they forced us all to do vaccines, I changed 180 degrees. I said, look, at that point in time, everything was locked down. So they needed to at least have some way to get out of it.
Yeah.
And we didn't know about all the side effects of the vaccine or how limited its effectiveness. The first study seemed to be very dramatic. And eventually they backed down. There's no more, mandate for vaccines for going into supermarket shopping centers and things like that.
Mm-mm.
So she said, yeah, but the damage is done. Yeah, okay. If you're on our side, that's fine. But just be aware, that we are not anti-vaccine. Yeah.
But it's so, just talking about that, right? Like the political side of things as well.
Right.
A lot of people do say that you're brilliant mind and fantastic that you can speak very eloquently about these issues that affect day-to-day lives of Singaporeans. But some people do ask, like, when you align yourself with the SDP and Dr. Chee Juan, right, it comes with a lot of baggage that someone, I think our age, we still remember a little bit of it, the Chee Juan, like with the megaphone and everything, and him and Chiam Si Tong and all. But the young people today, maybe they don't remember as much. But
they had no idea about it.
But some people literally just say he's unelectable.
Yeah.
So when you align yourself with Dr. Chee, you spoke glowingly about him as an optimist now before, but we want to understand, like, was that part of your consideration?
Yeah, it definitely was. My mom, she said to me, why are you going with this guy? So she said, he can't be trusted. I said, that's what the Straits Times is telling you, or that's what the local mainstream media is telling you. And in fact, my aunt, actually, she was a psychologist and she knew him. So she actually was very strongly supportive. So they had a bit of an argument. That's my mom's sister and her.
Okay.
And the most striking thing, which I remember, is before the 2013 Punggol East by-election. So my wife was obviously concerned. So I said, let's have lunch with Sun Juan. So we went to, I still remember this Penang place in One North. And as we were walking out of that place, my wife turns around to me and says, he's a normal person. I said, what? And she said, he's just a normal person. He's got, his foibles, his mistakes, but he's a straight out normal person. I said, yeah, he's not a psychopath. But she said, that's the way people of, our generation have been conditioned to think of him as a complete psychopath. And to me, the other point that illustrated that was in 2015. So just before the election, I remember I was at Raffles Place or Tanjong Pagar outside one of the MRTs, and he was out there selling books. And people walked across on the other side of the road. Then 2 weeks later was the Boat Key rally. And after he spoke, there was a line of people waiting for 1.5 hours to get him to sign the book. And I think what happened in between was the Commonwealth rally. I don't know if any of you remember that. But there was that rally in Commonwealth when that was the first time he was allowed to speak after 10 years.
Oh, yes.
And he just couldn't stop. He spoke in like 4 languages and 3 dialects.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, people get to see him unfiltered. See? And then they realize he's, in a way, as my wife said, he's a normal person. But he's also, I can't remember who was it, Viswa or somebody who talked about conviction politician. Most politicians in Singapore are viewed as pragmatists. They weigh up the pros and cons and they try and do what they think is on balance slightly better.
Yeah.
But Sun Juan is a conviction politician. See? He firmly believes in human rights, the dignity of the individual.
Yeah.
And he's able to get that across, which is why I think they're so scared of him.
But you say normal person, but isn't everyone who joins politics and essentially heads up a party, don't they come with a bit of ego, thinking that they're going to be the ones to make the change to save everyone and all?
Well, again, I think after you've been in politics in Singapore for about 30 years, you've been so battered down that you kind of realize what your limitations are. And frankly, I don't think anybody in opposition politics in Singapore today thinks that they're going to be the next Lee Kuan Yew. See, because things have changed so much from the 1950s. We had like 5-6 newspapers in each language. We had people could. The PAP ran a demonstration in support of Patrice Lumumba in City Hall. Yeah. Those kind of things cannot be done anymore. So I think most of the people in opposition politics are just trying to chip away, chip away at the edifice or make a chink in the wall and to try and open up Singapore a little bit.
So when you say chipping away, right? Because looking at your website for SDP, I'm guessing there'll be an updated manifesto.
It's a bare bones.
It's a
just
bare
right
bones
now,
thing, right? But even looking at it, basically you all have policy proposals for everything from cost, or like this was from 2020, so I know it might not be the most up to date. But cost of living, economy, education, healthcare, housing, population, climate change, ministerial salaries, town council. It feels pretty all encompassing, right? So what is the approach when coming up with these proposals? Is it I'm sure maybe you can also share like how those proposals are put together, the research that goes in. But when you say chip away, do you think that the role of opposition is to almost kind of as conservative as, say, the government goes, you all need to go more in the opposite direction just to have that balance?
No, I don't think so. And again, I put up a post that also did pretty well, where I actually asked both ChatGPT and DeepSeek, which were the policies the SDP had proposed that the PAP had followed, and what was the time lag in between. And it's pretty amazing what they came up with. So again, this is the conviction politician thing. Because these policies are essentially what we had subcommittees. So we have different people who are taking on different. So obviously healthcare was the one that I did. Education, actually, we had a couple of teachers. We had one lecturer, and Vincent Vijayasinghe was very heavily involved in some of the early development in the first round of these papers. And then we have many other volunteers. So what we have is we have a secretariat, and then people volunteer, and then they get slotted into one of them, and then we set up a Google Doc, and if necessary, we'll have a meeting, and then we go through all the policies, and then we get the young people to do the research and to find the papers to back us up. And once you've done the first draft, it's easier because then you're just revising it as you go along. So we revised the budget. We're almost ready to release the education update. And then healthcare, I've got a couple of people looking at. The housing, we actually did it not too long ago. We did a presentation with PSP. And so that one has got very minimal changes. So that will probably be next in line.
But there is stuff and data that as opposition parties you don't get access to. Right. So how do you compensate for that uncertainty?
So that is a limitation. But what we do, and again, this is where AI has completely changed the game. I asked one of my students, I said, how many % of your classmates are using ChatGPT? She said about 85%. And the university, to their credit, they have not banned ChatGPT. But they've said the lecturers now have to set assignments that are ChatGPT proof. And I figured, how in the world are we going to do that? So I attended a session conducted by a computer science professor. And it was really good. He said, what you do is you ask the student to go to ChatGPT and come up with the answer to your assignment, and then ask the student to critique the answer that ChatGPT has given. So, that's a good idea. I should do that.
Being contrarian for the sake.
Yeah.
But so, just talking about that, right? Like, I think I've also heard you speak about certain other issues in recent times as well, with regards to the racial quotas in immigration. Right, these are all definitely very heated topics in Singapore, and also talking about like the ethnic integration policy. Actually, what is your stance or the SDP's stance on a lot of the immigration policies of Singapore in the last 10 years or so?
Yeah, so we think that, we're not anti-immigration, but what we are anti is exploitation of low-wage workers, and that includes migrant work permit holders, as well as employment pass or even S-pass holders, who are brought in sometimes just purely to bring down the wages of everybody. So like we've asked for a minimum wage, but this minimum wage must apply to everyone. Once the minimum wage applies to everyone, the competitive advantage of bringing in a low-wage migrant worker disappears. So that's one of the things that we have strongly felt. And I asked this question at the AIPS forum. I said, look, don't you think it's time to bring in people to Singapore based on their skills and their commitment to Singapore? what really irks me is that you've got these women who are married to Singaporean men. Their sons have done NS, and they still cannot get PR or citizenship just because they don't have the educational qualifications. But they brought up Singaporeans who are willing to defend the country. They've lived here 20 years, 30 years. See? And so we believe that that's more important than the racial quota. And frankly, the US got rid of the racial quota in 1965. Australia got rid of the racial quota in 1973. So no major country that has large-scale immigration still has racial quotas except Singapore.
But you could also argue that a lot of those countries, there's a lot more racial tension, or at least what it seems like. And in Singapore...
No, not in Australia. Come on, they've got Chinese and ministers and things like that.
Yeah, okay, that's true. But I mean, sometimes I feel that the ethnic quota, even for when it comes to housing for Singapore, even though I wasn't a fan of it, now looking at what's happening in different first world city countries, where it feels like everything is so politicized, everything is so extreme. Maybe it's a good thing. So now I'm also feeling confused.
I mean, I think that's a bit crazy that, because basically what the ethnic integration program, which only applies to HDB, doesn't apply to GCBs, doesn't apply to condominiums, is that they're saying it's okay for rich people to live in enclaves. But ordinary people, oh no, cannot, because, and this is part of the elitist kind of view, see, that Thatcher and Reagan had, is that the elite can be trusted, but the masses cannot be trusted. See, the masses need fixed quotas. They need Indians to sell at a loss, so that they can preserve the dominance of the majority Chinese. Otherwise, majority Chinese will feel threatened and they will start killing off the Indians and Malays. Which is kind of ridiculous, right? That's not going to happen. See?
So, do you think it should be extended towards...
I think so. If you really believe that the EIP is helping to keep society together, then I think it'd be a great idea to have the EIP in GCBs and landed properties and in condominiums.
Well, I can't imagine GCBs having the...
And that would be interesting.
No, I think it would be.
So
because you have designated GCB areas.
Oh, yeah.
So, you have small HDB blocks which the EIP applies. So the designated GCB areas, you could do exactly the same thing if you wanted to.
Condos.
Yeah, condos easily.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's a good reason for that. Because, you look at the so-called elite schools, if you go to Kiasu parents and they can tell you what are the cutoff points and what are the waiting times and number of phase 2B and 3 places that are available. The vast majority of them are located in upper middle class areas. That's why it's a good thing when ACS is going to Tengah. My ACS friends, I'm from St. Andrews, by the way, but they're actually quite happy in a way, especially the ACPS guys who are very proud of the fact that they went to school in Coleman Street.
So if you're saying that if you really believe in it, it should be extended to all.
Exactly.
But recently with the new CD, the climate, environmentally friendly climate vouchers, right? That were extended across the board.
Right.
That also got pushback.
Yeah, but that's different, you see, because that you're giving money to rich people. Rich people don't need money. Rich people need to have neighbors of a different race. I think there's a slight difference between the two.
Yeah. I mean, that's why when that caused some pushback, it was interesting because it is something that also a lot of the things we cover, like news and current affairs, there is this, like what you said, there's a certain distrust of the masses, which sometimes can be very annoying and upsetting. And even as a layperson, I mean, we read a lot of news, we do a lot of research, and sometimes when we see the comms that comes out, it still boggles my mind that in this day and age, the comms almost kind of speaks down to us.
Right.
And is that something that you have seen gotten more and more apparent over the years?
I think so. And unfortunately, it's because of the polarization of our society in economic terms. So, I went to St. Andrews for 10 years. And the last 2 years, I went to RI. And at that time in RI, we had people from every secondary school. And now, we get letters from a recommendation for the university for teachers from RI. And they often begin with, although he didn't come from one of our traditional feeder schools. This is RI, no affiliated school, but you know what they're talking about. You know exactly which schools they're talking about. He said, he did very well in the school, and he managed to mingle well with the other kids.
And do you see that sort of polarization even amongst your patients?
Well, I'm in a public hospital. So the vast majority of the patients are low income to begin with. And in fact, the high income patients who come into public hospitals are people who are given up on the private sector. So they are quite glad to be seen. But there is obviously a difference, between the public and the private sector.
So, I mean, when we talk about policies and all, one criticism that often comes up for SDP is that the ideas are too radical or too idealistic. And then when it comes to the vote, right, I'm really voting for someone who will run our SMC well, who will run, take care of our day-to-day matters, make sure that our place is clean and everything, the elevator, lift lobby is clean and all. Well, what's your take on that, especially when people say that SDP candidates don't have that experience in managing town councils?
You wouldn't believe it, but we actually have some people who were involved in Bukit Gombak Town Council in 1997. They're still around. So in fact, they helped us with our Town Council management plan. So our Town Council management plan, which says that we are going to run the Town Council ourselves. We're not going to try and wait for EM services to try and come and look for us. See, we are going to run the Town Council ourselves. And we have some of these old guys who are around. When SDP ran the Bukit Gombak Town Council, which we ran pretty well. Interestingly enough, there was a clock tower that was set up by Ling Hao Dung that is still there, although it's no longer in Bukit Gombak. They've changed the boundaries so many times. So I think, and this is part of the point that we were making last Sunday. That we can put together an event so quickly with the distribution, the registration, and it moved very, very smoothly. So there is this thing which they call the SDP machinery, and behind the scenes, behind Sun Juan and myself and the more visible parts of the party, there's an incredible number of volunteers who come forward, who have experience in logistics and in various other aspects, and all of this is reflected in the town council management policy. But, things that people talk about as too radical, a lot of those things, the example I always like to give is the suffragettes in 1920. The idea that women could vote was considered too radical. They were considered terrorists, right? The suffragettes. But now the idea that you want to take away the vote from women is considered just totally out beyond the pale. So I think it's just a matter of when the time comes. And like I said, the very fact that the PAP has adopted many of our recommendations. So education policy, which I'm most familiar with because we're in the process of about to release it. There are so many things that we talked about. Like, for example, we talked about doing away with streaming. So what they've done is, again, for the masses, they've done away with streaming. But they've retained the IP schools and the SAP schools. So for the elite, you still have to do super well in your PSLE to get into an IP or SAP. For the rest, you have this subject-based banding. See, where you can do certain subjects at NA level, there's certain subjects you can do at express level. So they've adopted some of it, but not the whole package. And so again, like healthcare, they've adopted some of it. So we want to keep pushing, so that there's a genuine acceptance of the idea that you cannot sort a kid out based on, how they do in a particular test at age 11. See, which is the fundamental philosophy of SDP's view of education. So these things may be considered radical now, but I think, slowly the needle is moving. See, and I think with society, it's going to move invariably more and more that way. And right now, people on the left are super depressed in the US. I talk to my friends in the US and they cannot understand how the leaders of the Democratic Party are just caving, they're just giving in to everything that Trump is saying. I said, there will be a backlash, and after 2 years, hopefully the midterms, the thing will shift, the pendulum will shift completely. They said, no, he's doing so much damage. I said, no such thing. The country has survived for 200 over years.
Go ahead. You speak about the philosophy behind SDP policies, right? But what is your philosophy as a politician?
Right.
I know previously you mentioned that one of the most important things for you is sincerity.
Right.
Does that still hold true? And what other philosophies do you have, conducting yourself as a politician?
Yeah, sincerity actually is an easy one because Singaporeans are too smart. See, and you cannot fool them. In fact, we even have a term for it. If you're not sincere, you're very clearly seen as being someone who's in a wayang. So they can tell between the wayang and the sincerity.
And what defines sincerity?
Yeah, sincerity is you're doing something because you believe in it. It's in a way a conviction politician kind of thing. And people will accept the fact that how far you're willing to go. So you believe in something, you go this far, and then, you just stop. Whereas there are other people like Sunjoy maybe who go right to that extent. See? And people respect him for that. They say, look, okay, I'm willing to support you. I'm willing to do this. I'm willing to do the other. But, let's say I'll stop there. I'll give you an example of this. So a surgeon friend of mine during the 2050 general election, he said, I like what y'all are doing. He said, I'd like to support you. He said, can I give anonymously? I said, there are very strict rules about anonymous giving. You can only give up to a certain amount and we can only accept a total of this. Then he said, what do people do when they want to support you and they don't want to be known? He said, I don't want to get audited for my income tax and all that kind of thing. I said, look, they're not going to do that. Then I said, well, people come to our rallies and buy umbrellas. After the GE, he comes to me, he says, would you like some umbrellas? I got 20 umbrellas in my car. So I took 5 umbrellas off him. So I think people have their level of comfort, at which they're willing to. And there's this authenticity, you see. So they can see through somebody who's trying to be something that they're not.
And you've also spoken up against the ministerial salaries.
Right.
Do you think that comes into conflict with what you said about being a conviction politician? In the sense that, do you think as a politician, it's important that you walk the ground and take efforts to almost live a relatable life?
No, I don't think so, because that, in a way, is a bit of a wayang, you see, because you have to be comfortable with who you are. But it's not who you are, but it's how you deal with the people around you. See, there's a big difference. You can tell there are certain, I've had certain role models in my work. So there's a very senior cardiologist, he always greets the cleaners and they know him, you see, and they feel okay to talk to him. Whereas your other cardiologists just walk right past the cleaners and they just totally ignore them. So it's not being a cardiologist versus being a cleaner. You see, asking the cardiologist to go and start cleaning the floor, that's wayang. See, but the cardiologist who knows the name of the cleaner, for example, and the cleaner knows that this guy's a cardiologist. When somebody had a heart attack, they just go straight for this guy. You see, and they ask them. So I think that's the difference. You see, it's not so much, it's what people can see, because people can see through you. And again, Singapore's a very small place. See, so people talk, they hear things from their friends, from their relatives, and it becomes very apparent.
So do you think there's less of that in the current Singapore political landscape in terms of less sincerity, less authenticity?
I mean, it's very hard to judge. But there are a lot of questions that have been raised about the current generation of leaders. See, that in fact, somebody asked me, he said, just a couple of weeks ago, he said, when did the minister start living in GCBs? I said, probably when Lee Kuan Yew died. Because, Lee Kuan Yew was very firm about that. He said, even if you're a millionaire, don't go and flaunt it. Don't go and live in a GCB, you see, because there's just asking for trouble. He was smart enough, to recognize that it's important to retain at least some degree of contact and groundedness to it. I mean, of course, he did that for his own purposes, but he was a smart politician.
So do you hold Lee Kuan Yew in high regard, given everything that he did?
Well, like I said, the Lim Hock Siew and his wife were good friends of my parents. And I don't think it's easy to hold in high regard somebody who locks up somebody for more than 15 years without trial. So you wonder, see, why he was so insecure that he needed to lock up a doctor, without even charging him in court. So I think, there's no doubt he was very intellectual. But so I would regard his intellect quite highly. But as a person, as a politician, I think the stain of Operation Cold Store and Operation Spectrum, the fact that you could do that to a fellow Singaporean, without any basis, you see, or any proof whatsoever. I think that kind of disqualifies you to a certain extent.
I mean, we were talking a little bit about what's going on in the US and all that, right? And even on college campuses, and there's a bit of a backlash against the woke movement, if anything. And in Singapore as well, I think when you say the word woke, generally comes with negative connotations. I mean, I think a lot of people They will label what SDP says as very left-leaning, very woke and all. How do you feel about that backlash?
To me, that's a sign of insecurity, you see. So if the fact that, you can have a woman on the board and she can argue with you face to face and you feel uncomfortable about that, that says you are not very confident about yourself. And similarly with, other minorities or getting people with different socioeconomic status and giving them a seat at the table, which essentially is what the woke movement is all about. It is giving people who would not otherwise have a chance to have a seat at the table. And I think, even though there's a lot of rhetoric about it, but that one, there's no turning back the clock. See, I mean, Trump is trying, but he's going to fail. See, you notice that even he there was this State of the Union one message that he had this little African American kid who he appointed a Secret Service agent.
Yeah.
See, because he recognized that you cannot run away from that. See, you have to recognize that we live in a very diverse society. Singapore is not as diverse as the US, but it is pretty diverse. We are the most diverse religiously, even though racially we're not as diverse. But in terms of religion, I think we're the most diverse society in the world.
And you have publicly said that you feel our parliament is one of the least diverse.
Exactly. It's quite sad. There's 60% of the voters get 90% of the seats. What's this? The political scientist Alvin Ong. He said that's a misrepresentation of the public sentiment.
I see. So, I mean, one thing that we didn't cover, which I also wanted to understand, just if you could let us know, we've spoken a lot about policy, but just to go back into the medical side of you,
right.
You were the president of the International Society for Infectious Diseases, right? So one question I had was, how does a Singaporean who is dabbling in, who's spends so much time in politics and infectious diseases, how does one get into a role like that?
Right. A lot of that is actually being in the right place at the right time. So my career has actually been very, very fortunate. I've had a series of being in the right place at the right time. And the most classic example was during SARS. So during SARS, they 2003, they canceled leave for everyone. But I was very fortunate. My boss allowed me to go away for 2 days to a meeting at the in Atlanta. I can't remember if it was Atlanta or San Diego. And before I went, I took a couple of X-rays. So they had a special session on SARS in the evening. It was a Friday evening. And all these people from CDC and WHO were talking theoretically about SARS. And then I stood up there and said, this is what the X-ray of a patient with SARS looks like. And everybody kept quiet. The whole room full of all these experts from all over the world. And then after that, I got invited all over the place to talk. I got invited to Moscow. I got invited to
because you were the subject matter expert.
Yes, because SARS in the end, there were not that many people affected. Singapore had about 230 people. There were 8,000 people in China, which nobody heard about. Hong Kong, of course, they did well. So it was Hong Kong, Singapore, Taiwan, and Canada to a lesser extent, who had the bulk of the SARS patients. And so we got the opportunity to describe a new disease. It was essentially the first emerging disease of the 21st century. So once I got invited to do all those things, then you make contacts and everything sort of takes off from there. So I think I was, like I said, very, very fortunate to be in the right place at the right time.
Then when something like COVID-19 came around, how do you feel because this is really your field? Like, did you this is game time?
No, I still remember it was January 2020 and there was this community event in Taman Jurong. And it was, so the hospital said, the union, I think it was the Health Services Union, they put out a call, and I knew this was a PA thing, and so, but I just went anyway, and Tharman was there. And I just had this sense of deja vu. So I told the team, and I told Tharman, you better go on holiday as soon as you can.
Oh, really?
Because they're going to put travel warnings, and not just in Singapore, on the whole world.
Wow.
And true enough, it happened.
Yeah. As in, at that point, I remember there were just some rumblings of like what was going on in Wuhan and all, right? But do you feel excited for what was to come? Or
well, I was kind of apprehensive. And to be honest, actually, I thought it was going to end with the summertime.
Yeah.
Because that's what happened with SARS the first time around. And actually, Ong Ye Kung gave a talk at the university a couple of months ago, where he said that the Western countries they approach COVID like the flu, and it didn't work. He said the Asian countries approach COVID like SARS, and it also didn't work. And he said the next pandemic, we're going to approach it like COVID-19, and it won't work. So it's a matter of learning on the go, I see. And I think that, and communicating that, which is the hardest part, which is where you guys come in, Again, during COVID, I did many interviews and things like that, interestingly with like even BBC and Wall Street Journal. But I think the one that really took off was Asia One, where they did like an AMA. So people just fired out questions, and I just took them. And I think, very often policymakers, academics, we think that the public wants to know this, but actually that's not what the public wants to know. So it's good to have people like you guys, who have your ear to the ground, so you know what public wants to know, and then you can phrase the question to the so-called experts.
Yeah.
So all the work that you've done in the medical and continue to do in the medical sphere, how has that influenced your political work? I mean, in any way, has it given you new insight? Has it made you look at politics differently from how it would be if you didn't have on the ground experience in healthcare?
No, I think it has informed a lot of my policy thinking a lot. And again, it's largely through being in a public hospital. And that's one of the reasons why, I like doing the teaching and research, and that you can only do in a public hospital. If you're in a private hospital, you're answerable to your patients. You make a lot more money, but, it's different. Your focus is different. One of the things in a public hospital is you have to talk to everybody. So you have to talk to young, you've got to talk to old, you've got to talk to educated people, you've got to talk to not so educated people. So that's a kind of skill which has actually been very helpful in the political arena. But the other thing is, actually, when I came back from the States, the one thing that really got me into activism was actually HIV care. Because I'm not an HIV specialist, but it is one of those things that's like the bread and butter of infectious disease. And thankfully now it's kind of disappearing. But you have to look after patients with HIV. And the thing that really got me in 1999, 2000 was that none of the HIV drugs were subsidized at the time. It took till 2018 before they finally ended up on the standard drug list. So it was really bizarre because the patients were they were getting subsidized treatment for pneumonia, for brain infections, but they couldn't get antiviral drugs for HIV because that was just a policy decision that had been made. And so I got involved with Action for AIDS, and then through Action for AIDS, I got into Marwa, and then one thing led to another.
I see.
And so I think that introduced me to advocacy. Although, of course, my mom was a huge advocate for disabled people. So growing up, I got to learn a lot about her approach to advocacy and how she did it.
And any similarities in medicine and politics that has stuck out?
There's a huge amount of similarities. There's a famous quote by Rudolf Virchow, who is actually called the father of pathology. And he said, medicine is actually politics written large. So essentially, medicine is treating the individual, whereas politics is trying to treat society. So, and, it's like you treat a symptom, right? But you have to deal with the underlying problem. So a lot of the issues, when I give infectious disease talks, I talk about vaccine development and all this kind of thing. I said, the reality is every year, 30,000 to 40,000 people die of rabies, and most of them are children in Africa and South Asia. And rabies is 100% preventable. You know, they had a rabies outbreak in, I don't know whether you all remember this, in Bali a few years ago. And initially they wanted to start killing the stray dogs. Then, of course, the Balinese objected. So they went into this massive vaccination campaign. They vaccinated every single stray dog in Bali. And they ended the outbreak. So it can be done if there's a will. So that it became a big part. And again, being in the ISID, International Society for ID, which is focused on low and middle income countries. So the advocacy part was a big part of it.
I see.
So what, between 2011 and now, what has surprised you about your involvement in politics? Like what's the big thing that you've learned about politics that maybe the Paul Tambyah from 2011 didn't know before stepping on stage?
Well, the big turning point for me was 2013 when I got promoted. Because everybody was convinced I was going to get stuck, I was going to get fired, at best I would be tolerated. But I got promoted. And then this is that was a big shock to full professor. I was associate professor at the time. I got promoted to full professor with tenure. And again, there's a whole long story about that, but my theories about that. But I'm very, very grateful that it actually happened. So that was interesting from a personal point of view. But Singapore is like there's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So there's been social media, there've been attempts to control it. There's POFMA, the SDP were the first people to get POFMA. And we were, they told us POFMA was going to be against stirring up racial and religious disharmony. What did they get us on? Labor statistics. They were unhappy that we used a 7-year time window for unemployment when they said we should have used a 3-year time window. So that's the kind of thing that is a bit frustrating. But at the same time, it's also encouraging because we got a lot of support from the ground. So there were many lawyers who gave us advice. I mean, only one who actually agreed to represent us. But when we took it all the way to the Court of Appeal, and we got a very small little victory, but we lost most of it. But still, that was encouraging in its own way.
So, in the lead up to these elections, like what would be your message to Singaporeans?
I think you shouldn't be afraid. And that's the first and most important thing is you shouldn't be afraid. And the second thing is that you need to think about your future. See, because I hate to say this, but the PAP seems to have run out of ideas. They, even Bertha talked about that. She says that the NTUC just keeps recycling, upskilling, retraining. But, when we had the last major global inflation, 1973, the oil shock, I mean, what the PAP did was really drastic. They put in NTUC, they put in SILO to deal with the grocery prices once and for all, because they acted as a backstop, to prevent widespread inflation. But here, even NTUC FairPrice is not the cheapest supermarket that there is. You can get stuff cheaper in Sheng Siong, for example. So I think, in a way, this is what happens with any kind of ruling party that's been in power for too long. You get a bit complacent, you get a bit fossilized. And so what they need is, I think they need a wake-up call, similar to 2011. And I think what Singaporeans need to realize is that it's not going to be the end of the world. And in fact, the consequence of 2011 was big improvements in many, many areas. So if the same thing happens in 2025, we are also going to see big improvements.
And I mean, is there anything that keeps you up at night right now? I mean, I know that sounds like there's a lot of things that could keep you up at night. Right. But with regards to the elections, like what is your biggest concern or worry?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, there's certain things that come into my mind and get out of my mind very quickly. See? Like, for example, the question is asked, could they do another Operation Spectrum? Because that was before the 1988 elections. And I don't think they can, you see, because I don't think they will get away with it because social media will punish them. That's in theory. But, if Trump is going to get away with, that's the danger that a lot of people who are in so-called left-leaning parties all over the world are very conscious of. that like this Wisconsin election that's happening now for the judge. You know, if Elon Musk succeeds in buying the election, which is de facto what he's trying to do, he gave $1 million to this guy with a check, then, you know, that is actually a huge concern because that will embolden people in many parts of the world. I mean, Singapore it does look to the US a lot, but in a way, what it does is if Trump, you know, gets away with all these things, then the PAP may, and I'm not saying they will, but there's a possibility that they may feel that, you know, they can crack down even harder. I mean, you look about this, the Public Order Act, it used to be 5 people. Then it became 1 person with a mirror. Then it became 15 seconds taking a photograph. Now it's no people and just shoes. He's still violating the Public Order Act. You know, I mean, and in the past, you see, when you had Jimmy Carter or Barack Obama or somebody in the US, then they have some credibility when they criticize that. But now Trump has no credibility whatsoever. As I read an editorial, I think it was The Economist or something, there's no leader of the free world anymore.
Yeah. So, I mean, it is even for us, it's worrying looking there. That's why this election feels like, 2020, there was a lot of restrictions and all this. Even we are excited about this, generally optimistic. But I think you shared a lot of stuff that is thought-provoking. At least gives us a lot more context about your own background and your own philosophy towards politics. So thanks a lot for that.
I just question, are you going to break out a speech in Mandarin this election? Because there's always a highlight when you speak Mandarin.
I'm better 101. When I talk to individuals, I'm more comfortable.
I see.
But when I go in a speech, then suddenly all of a sudden my I start forgetting phrases or my accent goes off.
But your Mandarin is very powerful. I mean,
it's survival.
Survival. But I'm sure you will be giving speeches, right? A lot of speeches.
I'll be giving lots of speeches. And I'll probably put in a phrase or two if I can.
Awesome. So at this point now, if people wanted to find out more about the work that you do, the work that SDP does, any particular
come to our website, Facebook, TikTok. You know, we're having a house visit this evening, and we've got 9 or 10 new volunteers who have signed up. Don't know how many of them will show up, but you know, we've got a whole slew of activities coming up.
Okay.
And but for you in particular, which platform is the most are you most prolific on?
Yeah, to be totally honest, I know very little about these. I depend on my team. There's a bunch of young people who, and then they will send me a draft, and then they'll say, take a look, and then they say, okay, we'll post it. And I give them some suggestions here and there.
And which platform would that be?
So there's one guy who does TikTok, and then there's a couple who do Facebook and Instagram.
Oh, wow. A full team.
Oh, that's great.
Awesome.
Great. Yeah. Awesome. So with that, we just have the final part of every episode, the one Shiok thing.
Right.
So you still have a few minutes to think as Terence and I go first. Terence, you have your one Shiok thing.
Yeah, quite appropriate since I'm talking to you. There's a trailer for a new game that's coming out on Xbox and PS5. It's called Autopsy Simulator.
Oh, really?
So it's really a game where you simulate being doing autopsies, and I think there's a whole storyline behind it as well, where like the person doing it sees hallucinations while doing his autopsies. But the whole point of the game is that you literally have to be the one conducting the autopsy and then filing a report and everything.
I think Dr. Paul is thinking like, Terence, you think what I do is a game?
Hey, someone published a game that's being sold on multiple platforms, and lay people like us have a chance to just
get a peek
into what a doctor and everything does as well. Just a small peek. I think it's amazing to hear that lay people are interested in this as well.
Have you ever tried one of those games?
Simulators.
No.
They have surgery simulator and stuff like that.
Seriously?
So,
well, they do that for the medical students.
Yeah. So now it's coming to PlayStation 5 for people like me to try.
I'm sure the JC students will be playing it non-stop.
Cool. Okay, mine is one Shiok thing. I mean, a show that I recently started watching. It's called Daisy Jones and the Six. Have you seen it?
No.
It's a mini series that is based on the story of Fleetwood Mac, which is not a band that I listen to, but it's done as like a documentary. It's a fictionalized documentary about this band that forms, and I think they became the biggest band in the world at one point, and then right after one of their biggest performances ever, they disbanded . I think that's what happened to Fleetwood Mac, but this kind of dramatizes it with fictional characters. I watched the first episode and I was like, oh, this is not a show that I would normally watch, but I really enjoyed it. And it's, I think, only 8 episodes, 10 episodes. So yeah, it's a different kind of genre. And what I like is like, it's almost like they're interviewing the band members 20 years after they broke up in present time. And then they go back to the past and you can see this band emerge like in the 80s and 90s. So yeah, Daisy Jones and the Six.
I see.
So that's my one Shiok thing. And what about you?
Okay, I'm going to confess I'm going to be a total geek. Okay.
No, geekier the better.
And actually, I like reading. I read sometimes I read 2 books at the same time because I read one fiction and one non-fiction. I've read a couple of bad books recently that really shouldn't have been written, but they're just going rambling. But I think I was just thinking about it, and the best book I've read recently actually is by Donald Lowe. Yeah, and it's called The Price of Zero. So he talked about zero COVID and how, a policy which can work really well can turn out to be really bad. And this is whole black and white thing because he's talking about what China did. He said China was the envy of the world the first 2 years of COVID because their COVID cases were near zero.
Yeah.
But there was all kinds of unintended consequences that came about. The businesses were hugely affected. The whole economy, the building construction and everything that was going on in China was also affected.
Yeah.
But also the immunity was affected because people had never been exposed. Then all of a sudden they lifted all the restrictions just like that.
And they went nuts.
And then they went nuts, you see. So it's interesting because it's got the intersection of infectious disease, and Donald's not an infectious disease person, but he kind of got the idea of immunity and spread of infectious diseases pretty well. And he's a policy person. He's a behavioral economics kind of person. So he understood what happens when you lock people up and then you suddenly let them go. And I found that really, really interesting. It appealed to both sides of me, the policy and the infectious disease part.
Were you in the book as well?
No. It's all about China. Donald's very smart. He doesn't talk about Singapore in the book like that.
He focuses a lot on China.
That's right.
I see.
He's based in Hong Kong now.
Okay.
Oh, awesome.
But are you the type of reader that, like, if you encounter a bad book, you finish it all the way. You must finish it.
Yeah, I do. And I skip pages and I just go right to the end.
You never abandon, like, you never abandon.
No, I because, I keep wondering, is it going to turn good at the end?
You're waiting for that twist or something.
The twist or something,
Okay.
Unfortunately, they always turn out bad. If it starts out bad, in the middle it's bad, invariably by the end it's also bad.
I've been finding that out recently also, trying to finish books on the e-reader because it's easier to consume. But like if it's a bad book, I don't know how I'm going to get through that. There's always a percentage. They tell you how much more of the book there is. And I'm like, oh my God, that's 75%.
But TV series you abandon, right?
TV series I abandoned.
Yeah, same.
TV series is easier to abandon.
No emotional connection. But book is there, it's just there every night,
But cool. Thank you so much for joining us. Hope everyone listening found this useful. Please read up and try to make a concerted effort to understand what is at stake. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. All the best for the upcoming election.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you for listening, everyone. And we'll talk to you all soon.